Hey everyone, I'm Enzo Sefka, an interdisciplinary designer from the States who's been engaged in design as a hobbyist for a little over a decade and professionally for about half that time. On this channel and in this video, I'll be demonstrating what it looks like to build a digital design studio from the ground up and what kind of design projects can be made with it. Do take note that the studio build was crafted with minimalism as a guiding philosophy in mind, since my life has been the dictionary definition of nomadic for the past half a decade, and money has always been difficult to obtain, which precedes the form reason by the rest of my life. So here we are in the void, digitally starting from scratch. A default font face of the Windows operating system with the black canvas and nothing else in the mix. Well, let's go on ahead and change that up a bit by throwing a photo up on the board of what we're starting with. Here we have an empty room with scuffed walls and nothing assigned to the space. The perfect blank canvas in a 3D area. First, let's take this photo and use it to give the video a little more identity by turning it into a soft gradient background and then introducing a simple pattern overlay that is animated to produce a calming environment. Perfect! Now that the void has been transformed into a recognizable digital space where we can take a look at the concepts, workflows, and components that will go into building this portable design studio, we can get off to the races. To start the process, let's get this battered wall that will serve as the backdrop of our shooting stage looking a little better with a simple paint job. First, we'll wash the wall down with a light touch of water, phosphate-free Ajax Ultra dish detergent, and baking soda in order to free the surface of any dust, dirt, or grease that may be on it. Next, the wall will be dried by Lasco 3300 wind machine for a few hours to remove any moisture before we begin putting new paint on the surface. With the wall now dry, we can go on ahead and begin applying a thin layer of Sherwin-Williams Duration Home Interior Acrylic Latex paint that is matched to the 6421 color ID of the wall. We'll then go over it with another 2 or 3 layers until the wall is evenly canvassed and the rough spots have been blended over naturally. Once that's done, we'll leave the paint to dry for about a day before we begin setting up the capture table where we'll be able to get a clear view at what hardware will be going into the studio build. With the wall looking miles better, we now have a decent backdrop and can go on ahead and begin setting up everything else. For the stage, we'll use a mainstays 4-foot plastic folding table that has legs with an adjustable height. This will help us gain the best shots of our various products. To protect the surface of the table and give the staging area a cleaner presentation, we'll go on ahead and dress it in a PVA table cover. Out of the package, the table cover is going to have some creases, so we'll take care of that by ironing over it with a towel to smooth out the material without damaging it. Now, with the proper stage and backdrop, we need some artificial lighting for when natural lighting becomes unavailable. For this, we'll be using a pair of standard 3-way floor lamps in conjunction with some daylight LED bulbs that will produce a bright, color-accurate environment. For capturing images of the hardware that is going into this project and recording any displays from a physical perspective, we'll be using Bauer's Multipod Pro to hold our camera, which will be the 2025 Moto G stylus. I upgraded from the 2021 stylus to the 2025 specifically for this project, along with the fact that my 2021 had a failing USB-C port that I didn't have time to replace, and the difference in camera quality is quite a step up in my opinion. The lens and HDR mode seem to balance contrast, brightness, and saturation much better while cutting back on the frequency of shots defaulting to SDR within even the manufacturer provided camera app. The first piece of computing hardware we'll be taking a look at here is a basic external storage device. This 32GB USB 3.0 flash drive will be essential in setting up the mother brain unit of our studio, the desktop tower. It will act as our bootable drive from which we'll be able to install an operating system, in this particular case Windows 11, onto our system's internal drive. If you do not have a way to create a bootable drive from another drive with Windows already installed on it, or you just do not have another computer available to you whatsoever, then you will need to purchase a Windows 11 licensed USB stick from a retailer such as Best Buy, Micro Center, or Newegg. The second piece is the desktop tower itself. Here we have Corsair's Carbide 175R and ATX mid-tower PC case with several components already rigged up inside of it, such as the motherboard, that giant flat board that you see with slots jutting out of it, Wi-Fi card, heatsink, power supply unit, also known as PSU for short, and a few other parts that serve as the foundation of the system. Then comes the third piece, which is a graphics processing unit, often called GPU for short. This is what will do much of the heavy lifting for various operations of the studio in addition to the RAM. It is absolutely crucial that you have a graphics card matching the specs of the one I'm showing here, which is an NVIDIA RTX 2060, or offering better numbers if you want to follow exactly what I'm doing. Well, you might be able to get away with a GPU such as an NVIDIA GTX 1080 Ti with some tweaking and tough decision making in regards to the resolution for display and rendering. You will have a harder and harder time keeping up as the years go by and various programs along with their workflows become more demanding. At the time of creating this video, the NVIDIA RTX 2060 is already 7 years old, and even I have had to make several concessions in regards to graphics processing for more intensive projects. Following the GPU, we have the internal drive and RAM. Both of these components I upgraded for the studio build, with internal drive being switched from a Seagate 1TB Barracuda SATA HDD to Samsung 2TB 990 EVO Plus M.2 SSD, and the RAM being upgraded from 2 8GB DDR4 RAM sticks to 2 16GB DDR4 RAM sticks, which doubled the total amount of RAM. It was absolutely crucial to upgrade these components since we will be working with Windows 11, and trying to run said operating system on an HDD with only 16GB of RAM due to a whole host of demanding design projects is an unmitigated nightmare. For about the first 4 months that I was interfaced with Windows 11, I was running it off the 1TB Barracuda SATA drive, and it was a disastrous experience. Boot times were abysmal, indexing took forever, programs would sometimes straight refuse to execute, updates were an expert level trial and patience, you get the point. Thankfully, with this increase in RAM and having an SSD that provides far faster write times than any HDD ever could, issues such as large-scale rendering processes running out of memory or programs refusing to launch without copious amounts of digital coaxing are largely a thing of the past. Now, let's go on ahead and throw those components we just looked at into the desktop tower to complete the central unit of our studio. With the tower clean, cable connections checked, and everything snugly fit in, we'll go on ahead and screw the case back together. For the 6th piece of hardware, we have a Wi-Fi range extender along with the wireless card antennas and an Ethernet cable. Due to the arrangement of the modem and router within the residence that I'm staying, I had to purchase a range extender in order to boost the signal far enough to the room that I'm using, which lies on the complete opposite end of the building. The Ethernet cable is nice to have on hand as an accessory though when I have my tower positioned close enough to a router or modem router combo, since data runs exponentially quicker over cables than wireless signals. To power and protect electronic equipment of the studio build, we'll be relying on the 240V GE37055 Ultra Pro surge protector that features 8 power ports and quite a bit of cable length to a wall outlet coming in at 8 feet. With a surge protection rating of 2,160 joules, we should be more than set for running equipment off it without concerns about a stray thunderstorm frying the entire operation. Wanting the best picture and audio possible, I decided to go with cables from AudioQuest and Rocketfish, which will provide us with immersive audio to our speakers and a clear high-speed image to our display. Now, keep in mind that the HDMI 2.1 8K cable that I purchased is not necessary for most displays unless you either have an 8K capable display or plan on moving up to an 8K display at some point. The maximum resolution of displays that I've had up until this point has been 4K, and they have been consumer 3840 by 2160 4K, so the 8K capability is lost on me for the time being, but I went for the most expensive option since I got a massive discount on the cable, and I plan on trying 8K down the road. However, you only ever really need to buy a certified cable that carries the max resolution of your display, and brand does not matter by and large as long as the materials are the same. As for the audio cable, I went with the AudioQuest Pearl optical audio cable. This is actually totally optional since most sound systems come with their own audio cables, whether it be desktop speakers or a soundbar. I brought this into the build largely because of the fact that I got a massive discount on it. Otherwise, I would just say save your money and use whatever comes in the box with your sound system. With the audio and video cables covered, let's take a look at another AV component. This here is the HD60X external capture card from Elgato that supports 4K 60 HDR pass-through and can capture gameplay up to 4K resolution at 30 FPS. We'll be using it to record footage from other HDMI capable devices such as game consoles. While it can capture at 4K resolution, it primarily shines in its ability to capture a solid full HD image at 60 FPS, with 4K capture being a process that is more suited for internal capture cards as opposed to external ones. For this reason, internal capture cards are typically far more expensive. The HD60X also comes with a USB-C to USB-A cable for power and an HDMI cable for sending the video signal to a capturing computer. Now, let's get into some peripherals and remaining hardware staples. For input, we have a pair of keyboards and mice from Logitech that have held up wonderfully over the years. While the K360 is nice for smaller form factor size, the MK270, the one you're looking at here right now, is my go-to for its great price point, bundled in mouse, and amazing mechanical key feel. To wrap up the Logitech collection here, we have a mousepad from them which has been holding up super well, and their 988 Yeti Orb RGB game condenser microphone, which has offered very full and crisp recordings at a wallet-friendly $60. Just take a closer listen to me speaking in this video if my words alone have not convinced you. And to the right side there, you can see a 4-point USB 3.0 hub made by Insignia that we'll use for connecting additional peripherals to the desktop tower. Despite being an in-house brand product of Best Buy, it does its job with flying colors, and I've never had a problem with input lag, dropped inputs, or delayed signals of any kind. On the left side is a USB 3.0 extension cable that is entirely optional, but I do recommend it since the cable length on the USB hub is incredibly short. Before we move on to the last 4 major pieces of hardware, let's take a look at the rest of our input methods. Here we have 2 controllers made for the Nintendo Switch that also work with PCs as D-input controllers. The HoriPad is a very comfortable and versatile controller that works terrifically for all kinds of games, whether they be old school arcade fighters or modern open world adventures, while the Power 8 GameCube controller offers an affordable replication of the OEM GameCube controller that works well for games such as Super Smash Bros. Melee and Yeah, it's basically just for melee. Next up, we have the Nintendo Switch 2 with a slew of accessories such as a USB-C Ethernet adapter, repurposed camera carrying case, thumbstick caps, etc. This is Nintendo's latest outing that was purchased with the sole intent of it being a long-term investment into streaming. Unfortunately, with the rapidly rising cost of video games and the controversial presentation of its flagship game, Mario Kart World, the device has seen little use as of late. However, this is set to change as the priorities and goals of my studio shift, with it entering the next stage of its life in the coming months. Accompanying the desktop tower is an Acer Nitro 5 AN517 laptop that will act as a reliable workstation on the go and a backup system in the studio. While it can graphically carry everything that the desktop tower can, thanks to a slightly stronger GPU, I avoid doing extremely heavy rendering or intense gaming on it in a bid to preserve its internals, which sports some pretty impressive specs. Not to mention that I completely destroyed the battery of a Dell G3 laptop several years ago due to me running it 24/7, with good ventilation at that, as my main computer before I switched to having a dedicated desktop tower for good instead of relying on a mobile card system. To prevent any issues regarding battery heat or ventilation, I went the extra mile this time and purchased an airflow stand. And last but not least, for the sound system and display, we have the Sony HT-S100F along with the LG 50QNED 85TUA, which offers a 4K mini LED experience at 120Hz as opposed to just 60Hz. Thanks to this, the 85TUA is perfect for displaying fast-paced motion graphics and offering a smoother interface experience with an operating system such as Windows 11. As for the HT-S100F, it packs a strong amount of bass with remarkable surround sound quality that can project audio with ease even in the mid-sized room of a home. This makes it a decent option for non-headphone stereo playback when working with audio and frees you from the bulkiness of having an added subwoofer. Now, for all the audiophiles out there, yes, I am well aware that a budget-friendly soundbar from Best Buy is not a proper replacement for studio monitors or professional audio hardware, and no, I do not think that the best way to mix and master audio is by listening to it solely through something like the HT-S100F. For anyone who is serious about getting into music composition, mixing, etc., please get yourself a respectable pair of studio quality headphones. With all of the hardware components covered, let's go on ahead and start hooking up the necessary cables to the display, computer, and soundbar. For the display, we'll go on ahead and plug in the HDMI cable for both the desktop tower and then the Nintendo Switch 2 into HDMI port 2 and 1 respectively before we lock in the optical ARC cable right below them. Then we'll plug in the power cable, and that's literally it for the display. Next, we'll take a look at the back of the desktop tower. At first, it might look overwhelming, but trust me, it's super simple. In the upper zone to the left, we have the motherboard ports which handle connections such as Ethernet, USB 3.0, audio cables, VGA, DVI, etc. Those last two probably are not on the motherboard you own if you bought one in recent years, since VGA and DVI are admittedly quite old and have been superseded by HDMI in most, if not all, regards. To the right is the rear fan of the PC, nothing to really see there. In the middle zone, we have the Wi-Fi card and 10 female connectors along with the graphics card ports where connections for DVI, DisplayPort, and HDMI are available. Thankfully, we have two HDMI ports so we can connect our capture card for video input and our display for video output. And then within the bottom zone, we have the power supply unit with this power port. So let's go on ahead and connect our HDMI display cable first before we connect our capture card HDMI cable along with the USB 3.0 extension cable that will plug into our USB hub. To ensure that the capture card is getting proper power, we will go on ahead and plug it into one of the USB 3.0 ports. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's move that down. And then plug our Yeti orb right in next to it. Now all that's left to do is plug in the power cable and we're all set here. Lastly, we'll set up the connections for the soundbar by plugging the power cable and later on, the other end of the optical ARC cable that we plugged into the display earlier. Now with the hardware documented and the walls of the room I'm temporarily staying in mostly fixed, we can go about preparing the space for setting up the workstation of the studio build. Let's go on ahead and do a quick bit of vacuuming to prep the floor and then start placing the elevation blocks for the desktop tower. Since my tower is a mid-ATX tower, the blocks need to be placed about 4 inches apart and no more than a foot from end to end. These elevation blocks are being placed to ensure that the computer gets proper airflow and is protected from overheating or issues such as water leaks. You should never set a desktop tower directly on a loose fiber carpeted floor for a number of reasons, including static shock and it being a potential fire hazard. Now, some people may debate whether a desktop tower even belongs on the floor and might call me an idiot for not putting it directly on top of a desk with everything else, but as you will see later, the desk we will be using is going to have pretty limited real estate despite being quite sizable. This is largely because we have a 50-inch display to work around and plenty of peripherals to organize. Setting these elevation blocks up actually ended up saving me big time because not even just a few days later after completing the studio build, the AC unit had a leak and soaked the carpet completely around it. Thankfully my tower was elevated so it stayed perfectly dry and very happy. However, the blocks did absorb some water and require drying. This was also one of the reasons why I explicitly set the blocks a minimum of a foot away from the AC unit riser. With the desktop set up in an elevated position, let's go on ahead and screw on the Wi-Fi card antennas so we can get ourselves connected to the Wi-Fi extender later on. Now we can set up the biggest part of the workstation, the desk. This is actually not a PC desk, but rather a traditional 8-foot folding table made by Lifetime that does not fold in half. This has its upsides and downsides, of course, such as having the inability to fold into a smaller unit size for traveling, but in not having the somewhat bothersome mid-table seam, assuming you don't have a padded cover on top. It is covered with a white accent tablecloths and a heavyweight 14G vinyl sheet that will protect the surface and make it easier to clean off dirt, dust, and debris. And you know what? That is exactly what we'll be doing next to prep it before we put anything on it. After a quick wipe down to remove dust and debris that had gathered on the vinyl from moving to various places with it, we can go on ahead and start setting the coaster discs for the feet of the display. These discs are placed to avoid having the feet of the display leave permanent square imprints on the vinyl, which can be insanely difficult to get out without immense heat, and make it easier to shift the display around on the table without it getting caught on the vinyl. With a little basic geometry, all the discs are in the right place and ready for the display to be set upon them. Now we can slide the soundbar right underneath the TV with a little alignment work. Since the display and sound system are now placed, we can clean up the display with a bottle of dedicated screen cleaner solution and a microfiber cloth to ensure we're not seeing any ugly fingerprints or specks of dirt while trying to appreciate the image on screen. Then we'll go on ahead and begin adding the input methods, peripherals, and other devices to the table such as keyboards, mice, the USB hub, the microphone, game controllers, the airflow stand, the laptop, and the Switch 2 dock. With everything set up on top of the table, let's go on ahead and look under the table to do a little cable management. It is of course not anywhere near being the most pristine arrangement, but it'll get the job done, protect the equipment from random surges, and prevent me from witnessing a house fire. The last thing to take note of is the capture card being placed behind the soundbar and display. This is not the most ideal arrangement since the weight of the cables looping down over the back edge of the table might be putting strain on the port connectors of the capture card, but I have tried moving it far enough in from the edge so that the cables bounce themselves on their bezier. And with that, we are all set up and finally ready to kick off the next part of the journey by installing Windows 11 on the tower so we can bring our digital studio to life. Having transferred the old HDD and SSD into external drive shells, we can quickly check the connections of the tower to make sure that everything is good to go and plug in the bootable drive that is holding our Windows 11 installation media before powering everything on. As an aside note, we also have the XP Pen Star 06C drawing tablet, however this is being counted as completely optional in this lineup since I've only ever employed this for very specific illustration projects, with the majority of projects being accomplished strictly via keyboard and mouse. But before we continue further, I want to clarify that if you're following along with this video and trying to replicate it step by step, your eyes are probably watering from the basket price if money means anything to you. I want to make it clear that everything that I've put into this studio build was acquired over the span of a decade and a half with extreme deal hunting through second or third-hand suppliers. If you were to buy everything shown in this video brand new off the shelf in 2025, you would tank your bank account in seconds if you're anywhere within my financial bracket. With how challenging the economy is right now for a majority of individuals and electronics getting more expensive year over year, it is perfectly understandable if you can only afford a $200 HP laptop from your local tech shop, which was literally me back in 2015. While you might not be able to do things like render videos in 4K, broadcast multiple sources at once, have two workflows running in parallel, or make insane high fidelity abstract animations with your illustrations, you can still do quite a bit in the department of skill building with even a simple PC that isn't super powerful. You just need something to work with so you can start your journey of becoming an interdisciplinary designer if that's what you're following this guide for. All that touched upon, let's get into setting up the digital end of the studio. First things first, we need to configure a display and audio hardware before we can start the process of installing an operating system on our computer. So we'll quickly run through the configuration wizard for our LG display and then calibrate our soundbar with it to ensure that we're getting the best image and audio experience for our use case. With the display and audio equipment initialized, we'll then kick on the PC and hop into the motherboard BIOS where we'll be able to select our bootable USB drive that has our Windows 11 installation media stored on it. This will then put us into the Windows 11 installation process where we will complete a handful of tasks such as reading agreements of terms, selecting an internal drive to install Windows 11 to, dictating the human readable language of the operating system, configuring privacy settings, and a few other assignments. Once we're done all of that and dropped to the Windows 11 operating system, we'll go on ahead and install OBS, also known as Open Broadcast Software in full, which will allow us to directly capture the display digitally without needing to rely on external recording methods. With OBS installed, we'll go on ahead and begin familiarizing ourselves with the operating system on both the graphical user interface and command line level to get a better understanding of everything that we can do with Windows 11 before we get ourselves a few web browsers so we can begin building our custom desktop environment. Do take note that the CDE is going to be extremely involved since it is going to serve as the first official version of Prisxane, which is the direct successor to Horizon Wave, a desktop theme engine that I've been building for years before I realized that a CDE is much more flexible, comprehensive, and efficient. So the first thing we'll be downloading is a couple of proper web browsers since Microsoft Edge, the default web browser, is an absolute nightmare to work with. Garbage privacy settings, poor RAM optimization, and limited options to remove clutter make it one of the most frustrating applications to encounter on Windows 11. After we replace it with better options such as Brave and Firefox, we'll go on ahead with exploring the command line as we study the language and rules of the Windows operating system. Once we've set up a dozen library directories within the system, we'll go on ahead and begin building out our program library, clean up the core directories, and start modifying the registry with various keys and value edits, also known as registry hacks, that will allow us to change the functionality of Windows 11 to more effectively meet the goals of our CDE. This will involve us navigating the key tree for several hours, finding host sites for programs, and researching how Microsoft Store apps are bundled. Unfortunately, due to the frustrating nature of how Microsoft Store apps are stored and treated within the Windows 11 environment, I had to spend about a day studying how to manually install, uninstall, and configure default applications such as Windows 11 Notepad and Paint, in addition to installing the legacy versions of those programs. With v1.0.0 and Explorer Patch are now deployed, we can focus on configuring our previously acquired web browsers while adding a few other ones such as Waterfox and Iridium to the mix. Arc Browser and Zen Browser were in consideration until Arc was declared as reaching EOL, which made me reconsider the implementation of Zen Browser along with Iridium due to use case redundancy. After working a bit on configuring our web browsers, we'll start setting up document processing programs and text editors so we can begin building the knowledge database of our CDE, which will include information about hardware specs, writing scripts, indexing program operations, using operating system shortcuts, and plenty more. After readjusting some recording parameters from our initial transition from HD to 4K, we'll go on ahead and finish the process of installing the legacy version of Microsoft Paint alongside EarthView before we begin configuring the DPI scan of our web browsers so that we have more real estate to work with. I want to get EarthView and legacy Paint before doing so, since both will be critical to viewing all types of image files and or getting a quick zoom look at ratio accurate pixel alignment. We'll also start constructing design software Mesa, building out our web bookmarks library, calibrating critical web extensions, and organizing the subdirectory structures of Prisxane's essential directories. Thankfully, we have also been building our suite of file management tools at the same time, so we now have far more flexibility with extracting packages and repacking directories for archival purposes or repository sharing, which we'll get to later on. But before we dive into the next task button of work, let's go ahead and get ourselves a fast, simple, and secure VPN called Molvad. No, this is not a sponsored advertisement for a VPN. I'm just using Molvad because it's what's worked with my budget and supports real digital privacy efforts. Next, we can start adding web services such as Flighticon, VirusTotal, and Hostinger, which will play a crucial role in keeping us safe and or providing us with resources to create our host design projects such as websites, brand kits, interface concepts, and plenty more. Since we already have document editors, we'll download Ocular, which will serve as our versatile archive doc space for PDFs, comic books, and ebooks, which will come in handy later as our resource collections grow. But before we get that far ahead, we need to set up essential security services for sensitive data and start configuring our channels of communication. So now we'll configure our email inboxes, domains, address books, forwarding mats, and bridges. This can be a lengthy and sometimes trying process where you will have to edit a litany of options and clients, check keys, resync calendars, manually reset redirections, and troubleshoot connections with your providers. With the entire email configuration marathon taken care of, we'll take a short detour to start bookmarking software shots for operating systems such as Windows, Linux, and Android before we begin the installation of other pieces of communication software. Since we have email already covered, these services and clients such as Discord, Stoat, formerly Revolt, Element, and Cine will largely be used for direct communication or lightweight forum demands, since I had no purpose to break out the wallet again for something like uSent news groups, despite having a newsreader capable client such as Thunderbird at my fingertips. With direct messaging taken care of, we'll go on ahead and continue to build our library of web services while gearing up to begin building the visual framework of Prisxane. This is being accomplished with a suite of lightweight tools such as PNG.ICO, Icon Table, GlassFence, and DocReader. Accompanying the prerequisite process is assembling documentation for rendering progressive web apps, which we'll be relying on extensively for certain features of convenience. However, to ensure that we can open it at various file types for various programs, we'll need to get ourselves set up with Visual Studio and a quick way to view Markdown. While Visual Studio has some tricks for doing this and we'll launch that later, we're going to use an MD Viewer program for easy reading until we can get the rest of VS Code up and running with the shortcut configurations. To enhance our experience with OBS, we'll go on ahead and begin creating library extensions and plugins for it, since we've gone ahead and added a redirect notice for UWP applications as a standard solution until we have fixed the startup directory. OBS is already running on our system, but we will be reinstalling it to a new directory and fixing some native configurations so we can get the most out of the newly added plugins. Now that we have a handful of programs laterally installed and configured, we'll return our focus to exploring the Windows operating system by beginning the construction phase of our Power Tools collection. These tools will be a list of bash scripts, CLI programs, and shortcuts that will allow us to more easily maintain our installation of Windows, whether it be clearing out temporary files from various workflows or removing a bad icon cache. With the Power Tools collection underway, we'll begin building out our project lab where we'll be able to build out workspaces for the projects we undertake, whether it be video art, illustration, modeling, interface wireframing, animation, research and development, or something else. While building out the foundation tables, we're going to get ourselves further calibrated with services such as Stack Exchange, Codebird, GitHub, and GitLab, which will come in handy with troubleshooting problems, contributing feedback, solving programming hurdles, and keeping our software library up to date at a more direct level. This is now where we can begin assembling the visual framework for Prisxane, which will include custom docs, icons, profile avatars, drawers, and other items that will completely transform the visual design language of our CDE. The primary inspiration and research and development with the design language of Material UI, Gradio, and Glass Morphism will take notes from operating systems such as iOS 15 and Nintendo 3DS system software, also known as Horizon. As the visual framework was pieced together, the implementation of various features such as the live RSS feed bar also emerged. In the midst of the visual design process, there was also a short detour to get Linux installed within Windows as not only command line experience but also as a GUI experience. This was pursued after sorting out how to convert any application to an inherently elevated application so that we can run certain programs automatically at an elevated level without UAC getting in the way. With the process of installing Linux started, let's go ahead and integrate some data recovery software in case we accidentally lose essential files that have not been backed up to our drive pool. Now we can go ahead and continue the process of building out Prisxane, which will see us start to prepare the CDE for the porting in of content from Horizon Wave, its predecessor. All of Horizon Wave's assets are being ported in and remade to match the new standards of Prisxane, which completely changes the way that files are stored and how they're called upon. One of Horizon Wave's biggest problems was relying on direct links rather than relative relative past, which broke a lot of features when operating system updates would occur or UAM would be changed over. This is where we'll also start creating our system's environment variable table and obtaining other necessary CLI tools such as Rust and Yarn, which will come in handy for programming and package management, while services such as feed control will serve as a standard for locally written tunnel mode solutions, since we do not have the proper hosting means for running our own RSS feeds just yet. But thankfully, since we have VS Code configured with the project space allocated for Eleventy, we can go ahead and begin experimenting with the porting of some of my pre-existing websites. We'll also continue the process of getting Linux fully configured inside of Windows so that we have the ability to run Linux applications and explore the Linux desktop environment directly inside of the Windows desktop environment without having to dual boot two different operating systems. This was accomplished with Ubuntu and XFCE, which is arguably the most reliable way to get a GUI Linux experience on Windows without having to jump through the hurdles of VCX Surf's custom and sometimes complex WSL controllers. One of the benefits of the strategy is that files can effortlessly be moved between Linux and Windows environment on the same hard drive, which allows for seamless workflows and far easier navigation. It is also one of the best ways, in my opinion, to familiarize yourself with Linux and its concepts, which share a lot in common with Windows in general, since Unix is like the godfather of modern operating systems. So now we'll go ahead and finish setting up the GUI client for installation of XWSL before we start the process of building configuring Sunshine within our CDE, which will allow us to remotely control the computer from our Android phone. The only Linux related problem left to fix is a few minor remaining issues with the library of distros. Next, we can set up visual automation tools such as Windows Sizer and Windows Centering for the fast scaling and organization. These tools and a few others will be crucial for measuring and fixing the interface scaling of our CDE before we begin dock refinement. We'll also take the opportunity to install a wallpaper change scheduler and a port of the dynamic wallpaper feature for macOS, which will allow us to automatically cycle through various daytime-based wallpapers from Prisxane themes that support said feature. With that out of the way, we can get to work on completely rebuilding the dock and its fences for a more symmetrical layout that makes far better use of the available desktop real estate. This process will continue in the background while we add more web services and install more programs for our creative suite, such as video and audio software for producing high-quality GIFs, checking audio file integrity, editing videos, mastering audio, and composing music. This will allow us to start configuring Python on the system with both individually managed installs and Python Manager available for specific use cases such as running radio apps or building small-scale solutions. So if you have Python in hand, we can continue setting up our GitHub presence and gather together necessary NVIDIA driver toolkits for multifaceted processes such as frame interpolation and image enhancement. Due to the nature of the Windows operating system, we'll have to take a minute to reconfigure the environment variable table further to fix any remaining conflicts with Python, since the paths can get messed up quite quickly when you have multiple versions of Python at play. To make it easier for us to keep track of managing Python on our system, we'll build a guide to manage those installations at both the local and global level for system users. With that out of the way, we can further expand our audio workstation with a few pieces of tracker software such as Furnace and Renoise before we implement OpenSego for marking any shared files that are CFA installed pre-production or subloaded. This will free us up to start gathering other pieces of software such as Pixelover from itch.io and other portals for game development, while testing out package managers such as Yarn and NPM to launch locally hosted versions of web apps. Continuing along with setting up our development environments, we'll begin assembling the necessary tools and emulators for troubleshooting, editing, testing, and capturing applications for the Android operating system. This will see us installing software such as Android Studio, the Android debugging bridge, SDK platform tools, APK extractors, BlueStacks, and Nox. This will then put us in a good position to start setting up line headers before we install some native Windows add-ons such as Android Screen Share. We can then check the global tree before acquiring the remaining pieces of game development software such as GDevelop 5 and C shaders. This will update the settings of our Bitwarden vault before adding a number of central services such as carrier, domain, and IP lookup for keeping track of available assets. Accessibility guides and SEO assessors will be introduced shortly hereafter to assist with web development and web marketing. For a minute, we'll return to the desktop to continue developing Prisxane further with an addition of a few new tools such as WinPiloter and WinHawk, which will give us more options for overhauling the functionality of our CDE. Then we'll finish the process of uninstalling Copilot after a partial return due to a system refresh and the fact that we're waiting to reinstall ViewTool to its new home within the CDE. Since that has been accomplished, we can begin doing the necessary visual research for painting Prisxane to bring it to the closer Linux look, since we have a complete recalibrated visual layout. So this will see us creating the first global theme for the CDE, which will encompass not only the desktop but also various pieces of software such as browsers, DAWs, IDEs, and other workspaces. With most of the program library established and the functionality of our CDE mostly built out to meet our 10 foundational goals, we'll begin working on path handling and brand design. Both of these are going to be crucial to ensuring that Prisxane not only has a recognizable visual identity, but that all of its assets can be easily transported between various systems without the entire product breaking. After an entire day of concept development and refinement through an iterative process, we now have a unique brand kit that strikes between futuristic and professionally playful. With adjusted paths, we can also bring additions such as OpenShell into the mix, which will help immensely with bringing the entire CDE together as a comprehensive package and giving us back some highly coveted features from prior versions of Windows such as Windows XP and Windows 7. We'll then update the OEM information of our Windows installation to match the rest of the landscape we've been constructing so far. Having those elements in place, we can now focus on excavating the next layer of Windows to familiarize ourselves with modifying resource files and completely restructuring stacks to our needs. Directories that were left untouched until this point are now up for grabs, as we'll be editing entire resource collections and building our own with tools such as Resource Hacker, BDS, and new PS1 PowerShell scripts. Gconvert with a clear checksum will be a massive in regard to bypassing any of the issues with DBSpring and helps along the way until we eventually get folder marker integrated into our workflow for quicker arrangements. With a quicker way to manage visual assets in the past, we can go ahead and begin bringing all any config files in line with the new database that we built, which will be stored at the root of the current user directory. This will require us to restore a few defaults before switching back over the placeholder files to test new resource states. Luckily, we address this now before we begin the marathon of asset creation, which will include well over 1500 plus unique icons that will address the entire CDE along with dock variations, context-specific fences, cover art, animated wallpapers, and matching banner rules. While constructing our library of visual resources, we'll also go ahead and begin building web links in our CDE that will allow us to quickly navigate to the portal's various services such as Xbox Network, Molvad, My Nintendo, Capcom ID, Azure, SourceForge, Wars, Ubisoft Connect, and plenty others. Since we are porting the entirety of Horizon Wave into Prisxane and restructuring the entire system map, we'll document all path adjustments to the table where we can easily copy out shortcuts for building new redarcs until the new framework is fully implemented. After fixing a few issues with feed control, we can go ahead and begin building a new RSS catalog from FeedSpot with our own conversions thrown in from feed control. While other programs such as Adobe Tools are being registered, we'll also continue the process of visual identity work in the background since it's now involved with essentially every single step due to its comprehensive nature. This design process will also see us begin to compose our font collection and make regular use of tools such as SVG Grabber, FontForge, and Adobe Illustrator. Now we can go on ahead and get into figuring the ins and outs of NetSet as we grow a library of locally hosted web apps which will be running simultaneously on various ports with different startup and shutdown windows depending on our workflow. Process Explorer is going to be installed along with the entire system internal suite, which will allow us to find process by ID much quicker and give us a better under the hood view that Task Manager can't compensate for. After fixing the scaling rules for favicons on our web browsers and resolving a dozen errors with image file extensions, we begin putting together the cover aesthetic of Prisxane's dark mode, which will be the default theme of the CDE. Before we return to our visual identity work in full, however, we will have to sort out some issues with the group policy editor due to the feature being MI by default on the home edition of Windows 11. We'll then call an RGC to investigate some download permission errors that started mysteriously occurring after closing VS Port 53604 and browsing the running index with a resource monitor. With that resolved, we'll go on ahead and lock the sub toolbar of OpenShell to remove it from the head pane of Explorer due to it being a functional redundancy that takes up valuable real estate. Thankfully, most of our registry work is done from this point on. We can turn our focus to finish building the asset collection for Prisxane while bringing other device emulators into play for software capturing or music composition. With the majority of the visual assets produced at this point, we'll be turning our attention to VS Code on our IDE workspace in order to start the process of porting websites in 11T with the goal of simplifying web development and having more control over how we build our site stack and push it to the web. After reading through deployment documentation and running a few tests locally, we'll begin working more with GitHub's desktop app to manage our repositories more effectively. With a light refresh on web development standards and getting a new proposal drafted out for the redesign of my primary website, the TD is mostly complete with all of its core services configured and necessary features running in order. The major hurdle from this point forward will be the implementation of a locally hosted AI agent with the help of Silly Tavern and complete the remaining ends of the visual asset library to bring the rest of Prisxane CDE together. And here we are with a custom desktop environment or CDE completely assembled. Here we have Prisxane version 1.0 running live. You can see up there we've got the profile icons, we have the news bar, we've got that glassmorphic aesthetic going on right there with that overlay, and we have, you know, our core apps and software with the core directories right there in the middle docked. And then here we have actually the settings index that has been completely rebuilt from the ground up to focus on system functionality and nothing else. So you're not going to see anything in here relating to themes or skinnings or visuals or music or anything like that. Instead, it's going to be solely about system functionality. We have a knowledge base there that helps us keep track of different methods of, say, working with command line or handling programs or updating a piece of software or troubleshooting things. We also have direct access to the start menu and the taskbar. Here you can see in the start menu every single piece of software that is installed on the system. This is really nice because now that means we will not have to go and dig through directories to find certain executables. Instead, everything can be found in one place, which is kind of the idea of the start menu. However, the start menu typically can get very messy on most installation of Windows because people do not maintain it. But here we have direct access to it, so we can go on and maintain it. And you can see me bringing up various programs there in the start menu seamlessly. We've got the NVIDIA app, we've got Node Version Manager, Dolphin, Kden Live, everything else, you know, Parsec, Net Framework, whatever you might need use of, right? We also have Windows tools up there in their own directory. They're at the top of the start menu. And then here, we also have the same thing for the taskbar, right? So if we want to go on ahead and remove our add-items to the taskbar, we can do so directly from File Explorer without having to kind of go through the guesswork of pinning and unpinning programs that sometimes don't like to unpin correctly or pin correctly. And then there's XWSL Sunflower. This is actually our installation of our Linux GUI interface within Windows, right? So that we can use Windows as in a graphical user interface way instead of just only a command line way, right? With WSL. And then here we also have an entire library of device emulators for various different consoles. Some device emulators are stored under the programs directory as opposed to the library, but the library does handle pretty much most emulation of all machines, such as, again, like Palm OS or GameCube or PS2 or Sega Dreamcast or various arcade machines, right? And then here we also, of course, have some native Windows games. A lot of these are fan games. Since this is honestly the way that most fan games are built, they're usually not built as ROM hacks or mods. A lot of them are built as Windows programs, right? And so here we have things like Poké1, we've got Sonic Drift 16-bit remake, and a couple of others that I've been dying to try, but I haven't had the time to try just because I've been so busy working at this. But you can see here we can, again, pull up every single piece of software, and so I was bringing up Poké1 there in the start menu. And then also down here, we also have another library for kind of retro consoles that don't really have a home. So here, this is dominated mostly by Sega consoles. I'll be, honest there, because the Sega Dreamcast and other consoles didn't get their own directory directory. There's just no Sega directory. Instead, they were put into a generic retro consoles directory, of which Sega pretty much is kind of holding most of the territory there. And then here we also have deep ROM. This is where games and mod packs and other assets are stored. They just have directories that are too deep, right? They have too high of a directory depth to be stored elsewhere within the system, and so they're put at a higher layer within the system. That way they can be stored properly without running into character path limit problems. And then there's a web links directory right there, which we obviously have empty. We do have some web links though up under profiles, which we'll touch on here in a minute. And then I was also showing there the captures directory that does store all the captures from across the system. So whether it's a screenshot or a video snippet taken in any piece of software, they'll always render out to those folders. That also does go for like AVI recordings from emulators or even captures from OBS, as you could see there. And then here's all of our editing programs, right, for our various interdisciplinary designer workflows. And then we also have file management right here for transferring files or cleaning up directories or archiving files, right? And we also have message services down here. We've got our direct message apps, we've got email, we've got Element and Cine right there, which are matrix clients. We've got Discord, which, you know, everyone knows Discord is basically glorified REC. We've got extensions there for Discord. Every single program is set up with this general schema, right? So you're always going to have it where you're going to have extensions, directories, and then I'm forgetting the third one off the top of my head right now. And then you'll also have occasionally an installation folder. That sometimes happens for Microsoft apps that have to be extracted, installed manually. They have like their own certain setup. And then here's like browsers, right? And so yeah, you have directories, extensions, sometimes user apps. For browsers, I have that. That's because a lot of the browsers, I have multiple user profiles set up for various use cases or workflows. So that's going to be specific to browsers. But if we go back here, let's head down to say program readers, right? You can see here we've got like hex editing apps. We have Visual Studio for coding, right? We have various text editors, things like that. If we need to look at something at a glance, we have access to both legacy Notepad and modern Notepad or Windows 11 Notepad. Same thing with Paint, right? And then here we have OBS Studio with all the extensions. We got SNAS there. It completely resorted the way that programs have various versions installed. So now there can be multiple versions of a program installed on one system. This was done for Audacity, where I have Audacity 2, 3, and 4 installed. 4 is currently still in beta, and it looks super promising. And here, though, you can see again all of these tools. Again, we have got Godot, we've got Unity right there for like game development, right? Also GDevelop 5. We've got various trackers for music production, various DAWs, right? And then we also have things like file editors. We've got various programs for doing digital painting, for also doing like 3D modeling and things like that. So really a robust library of programs there. And then here we have Mix, Scroll, and VLC Media Player. Mix is stored here in the Media Player box instead of the editing programs, simply because I believe that DJing is more of kind of like a media playback thing rather than necessarily a creation type thing. Even though you are creating a mix, it still is more of a media player in functionality than it is necessarily, say, like an editing program like Audacity or FL Studio or you name it, right? And then over here we have program files, of course, and program files x86, which store our 64-bit and 32-bit architecture programs. And then we also here have the users directory, which has now been synced again across the board. So one thing you'll be noticing as we're going through this, right, is that this is an all-encompassing theme, right? Prisxane is the first version, or how should I say it? I guess it's the first version of this project I've been building over these years, as it's gone through various names. It's the first version that is home to comprehensive themes, right? And so this dark reflection mode I'm showing you off right here, this is the first comprehensive theme I've ever built, which means it encompasses not only the desktop, but everything beyond the desktop, right? So all software apps, everything stored within the desktop is going to have this theme. Even my Android phone also has this theme. So everything is connected through like this sort of virtual world theme, right? And so comprehensive themes has been a really big thing for Prisxane, and this is what I spent like 3 to 4 months working on. And it took a long time, admittedly, because there's well over like 1,200 icons, right, that had to be built from scratch, along with docs, and along with fences and a bunch of other things in order to give it this visual package, right? And here you can see Firefox, Brave, various browsers, right? They're all matching to the theme, which obviously requires various web apps or tools in order to build out those theme packs that then load into those pieces of software, right? So they can render out and be a part of the collective. Then we also have, obviously, like background music that comes with the themes and sound effects, and a couple of other goodies, right? That are built in there, which make for just such an immersive experience, and that's really what I was aiming for at the end of the day. And then here we have our media collection. You can see see here that we have like our music here stored. You can see the Prisxane album actually right there that I made, 4 tracks that I had composed over the course of about 2 months. And then you can also see there that we have this really, how do I put it, kind of like feature-rich music library where basically you can go into a genre, right, umbrella genre, then you can find subgenres under the umbrella genre, and then you can find music albums, right? And they all have their own icons and visuals, so nothing ever feels empty or blank. Granted, music metadata right there, that's a work in progress. That is going to be touched up as time goes on. It's right now sort of just being treated as a sort of holding area for a lot of my music library that has yet to be transitioned over into the new setup. And then here we also have our entire font library, right? Categorized by various styles or use cases, and you can go in there and find plenty of fonts, all the fonts that are installed in the system, so everything is basically micromanaged across the board so that there is just no junk lying around anywhere within the operating system, keeps everything nice and tidy, just as we need it to be in order to be effective with our interdisciplinary designer workflows, right? Our interdisciplinary design workflows, my bad. And then here is 2 books, right? Well, one's a book, one is a comic, and these are here as a demo for Ocular, which is our document reader, and it handles things like PDFs, ebooks, comic books, and a lot of other really cool things, right? So I would say if you're looking for a document reader, definitely try Ocular. It is made by, I believe, KDE, or I could be wrong, but I think it is. And it is just one of the best document readers that I've used to date. And then here you can go on ahead and see also the project libraries directory that we've been building out, that I've been building out, that allows me to quickly start up projects for any kind of digital content by basically giving me a preset list of directories that I can then build out content within, right? And store assets and elements and other features within as I am assembling these multimedia design experience. We can also go ahead and head up right here, CMD, and we're going ahead and actually we're going to create 3 new folders right there on the spot by using the make directory command, and then we're going ahead actually, and then, you know, again, we're gonna come back here, take a look quickly. This is more or less a guide right there that I just opened. There's several schema guides kind of telling you what each directory is used for or what's the recommended use case, and so that can be kind of helpful just to remind, like, okay, what do like these directories do? You know, what are these directory tags meant for? And everything you'll see there, like just in the previous directory where you saw like the 4 alphanumeric character directory tags, those all have a purpose, and that can be read about actually in the directory schema and why they're set up that way. And so the way that it works basically is that you build out these project libraries, right? They have their own tags, and then in those project libraries you can store similar projects to each other. So under arrows, this is stands for my name, Amzer Sefka. I took a couple letters from my own name. This is just where basically all of my projects go, just a miscellaneous assortment of them. But if I wanted to do something specific, right, like in the example library, this is for example schemas, right, in order to build out projects. We're actually going to go ahead and quickly copy this over. But you'll see in some other ones that there are certain directory structures built that serve purposes of, actually we're going to close out of that serve the purpose though of various use cases such as like making music albums, right? Like generating music albums or being like an idea workspace and things like that. Up here in the profiles, we're taking a look here. This is where you can find direct links to Azura. And one of the really cool things here is that Azura now matches the theme with Prisxane. So Prisxane and Azure are now connected. No longer are they separate projects. Instead, they actually now overlap, because prior it was, you know, there was Horizon Wave, which was like the desktop theme engine, and then there's Azure, my digital network tool project. But now they're actually working in tandem to where now you can match your Azure profile to a Prisxane desktop theme, which has just never happened before. So now those Prisxane comprehensive themes, right, ones that encompass everything, now includes Azure profiles. And so now if you want to go ahead and match the color scheme of your Azure page to the theme, it's not possible. Just with a CSS style sheet that comes bundled in with the theme pack, and it just makes everything all the more sweeter, you know. And you can kind of have this sort of immersive virtual world, right, where everything is sharing some kind of design language, sharing colors, you know, sharing shape language, and it's really, really cool to witness. And this, of course, is Azure v3 that I just clicked on. This is taking me back to my old Azure profile. V4 has not been deployed across the board to Azura. Azura, if you go to azura.social, it's still showing V3. It's very dated. A lot of work needs to be done on it. There's a lot of different assets and avenues that just got to be revised that I haven't had the time to get to yet, but that is in the books for 2026. But for now, I've redone my own personal site with the Azura engine, and I have been loving it so far. Easily readable. Accessibility has been a big point with rebuilding the site from scratch and a bunch of other things. And then over here, we also have where we can manage our user data. A lot of this is just save data files for various emulators, or save files saved for PC games. So this includes things like local saves, which is usually SRAM, or also save states. This can be obviously used for more than just like save states for emulators or whatever. Like if you want to maybe make like, I don't know, bookmark tags for web page reading or something, I don't know, some other kind of like save point feature, you can toss it in here, you know, and just use the directories for whatever you want. I want to kind of emphasize that the library and the way that profile directories are set up don't have to be used to the use case that I have here. This is just simply being showcased the way that it is, simply because experiencing media like this, or you know, being immersed in games is that's kind of what I do. I'm a gamer, you know, so I have a lot of video games stored here, but you could choose, you know, something else to store here if that's your focus, right? And maybe you want to put an emphasis more on music, and then maybe put your games directory under storage. Who knows? It just depends again on what you really do with most of your time. But I think personally, this is a good way to store things, just because it does give you access to all of these other platforms that normally you wouldn't have access to, right? And so kind of having a dedicated area for emulators is really nice, considering that there's so many of them. And there you can see that we have emulators for, again, like Xbox, PlayStation. There's Xenia for Xbox 360. There's Zemu for the original Xbox. But yeah, got PlayStation, Xbox, various arcade machines, Palm OS, right? So like some old like personal digital assistant devices from back in the day. We've got them all covered. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's what I think is probably the best case scenario. And then we also have Deep ROM, which again, this is just where we have software stored that does not have a home anywhere else, just because again, it needs to be so many layers up before, you know, it starts to run into character limit problems, or I should say, or else it will run into character limit problems, right? You can technically disable the 255 character limit within Windows, but it doesn't really necessarily work all the time, and some programs won't respect it or even be aware that it's been changed in the registry. So it's something that I don't like to deal with. Instead, I like to adhere to that 255 character path limit. And really, at the end of the day, you should be sitting under it anyways. If you're not, that just means that your directories are they're just way too long. You need to just shorten your names. You need to go through and optimize stuff. But anyways, yeah. And so I was just showing you right there again, Deep ROM with its various games in there. They're not all emulated games. Some of those are actually a mix of PC games as well. It basically is just for any piece of software that is just gonna have, again, a too high of a directory depth. And then here, of course, you can see there that the profiles have their icon stuff laid out in there with their directories. Then here we have LMS and Discord. You can see that, again, this is just showcasing further that there is, again, this comprehensive effort with the theme to literally skin everything. So no matter if you're making music or if you're video editing or whatever, you're gonna have, you know, various ways to kind of see the theme play out, right, and in various locations. Here you can see our path. So right now what I'm doing is I'm actually running various programs for the command line, or I'm not running them, but I'm kind of just bringing them up just for showcase. So we have like Python installed, Rust, WSL. Our path is absolutely packed, right? We've got GIFSKI, we've got FFmpeg. We can work with most pieces of software straight from the command line, which is so nice. I just kicked off the tree right there just to show what, you know, is inside of the system. So what this is going to do is this is basically going to map out all of the directories visually. It's probably one of the most fun things to do with CMD is you just type tree and then you look like a hacker. But anyways, so yeah, and then that's what we're recording right now. Captures, as I think I may have already iterated before, is basically the home to, again, all of the recordings from across the system, again, whether AVI recordings, again, from emulators, or it's from OBS recordings, or it's maybe from some capture from maybe a browser or something else. Everything's going to go there. And then just here, you know, I'm going to just show off that, yes, indeed, every piece of software does have a place in the start menu, and it's really kind of surreal to see because I've never had this system configured this way. Any system, actually. This is the first time I've done this with just any computer operating system. I haven't done this with Linux, and I've done this with Windows, and so finally making the best use of Windows has been really fun. And I think this experience has taught me actually a lot about computing, or has allowed me to see things about computers in new ways that I just didn't know so before, right? And so I'm working a lot more now with things like Node Package Manager, working with VS Code, working with 11c. I used to have code blocks, but that got scrapped in favor of VS Code because VS Code just covers more of the use cases that I needed to. It's a little bit simpler. And but yeah, and then obviously here we're trying to open XWSL, but it is presently actually not running because I had terminated the instance before. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to close down a couple of these items, and then I'm going to show you guys what the desktop looks like without the animated background. So an animated background is going to be turned on or off. I usually turn them off if I'm doing like actual work because I don't want it to, you know, be putting a weight on the computer, even though I will say Lively is really, really lightweight. So most of the times I can leave it open in the background, but I just prefer to just sometimes turn it off just to maximize my PC resources. But anyways, now we're back here with the desktop, and I'm going ahead and look now at our Linux installation that has a graphical user interface, and we're not just working solely from the command line. Here it's going to go ahead and actually open up our client really quick. It's just going to take a little while to make a connection to the remote desktop, and then we're going to go ahead and be able to see Linux show up right here in frame, which is kind of wild. So yes, this is Linux, like a full-blown version of Linux running inside of Windows. It does have a slightly lower frame rate, I think, in some regards. As you can see there, like it has like a little bit of delay, but not really too much. And here we can actually see our Linux directories that we can actually see also in Windows. If we go into pictures, you can actually see the wallpaper that's currently set for the Linux virtual system right there. And then if we actually come back out to Windows here in a second, we actually see those directories directly on Windows, which makes it so easy to move files between the Windows operating system and Linux operating system. So here you can obviously see here, you know, we've got boot, dev, etc., home, you know, the whole 9 yards. And if we click into home, you're going to see obviously my username there. So like click there, and then when I click here, now you can see like documents and downloads and pictures, and inside of pictures we've got that wallpaper right there. And so this has been super fun to use. I think it's a really good way to get familiar with Linux from like a Windows end if you don't want to dive straight into installing a Linux distro on a computer. And maybe you don't want to do dual boot yet, or, you know, you just don't have an use case enough for Linux, or maybe you just really like Windows, but you also want to have access to Linux, right? And for me, I can't really say that I really like Windows. I only really like Windows when it's heavily modified, like what I've done here, which is why I made a CDE. That's why Prisxane exists, because Windows Vanilla is absolutely miserable to use. But here's we have Ubuntu, which I can show you really quick. I don't know if I said that right. Then we're gonna run UFH really quick. I know I've heard some people say Ubuntu. I'm not really sure what's the proper pronunciation, so I probably just made some PC nerds cringe, but oh well. And they'll also run fast fetch, and then there you go right there. It's kind of ironic that I said that because I'm a PC nerd myself. All right, so then we're gonna go back here. We're gonna close Ubuntu, and then we're also close Debian. And we're going to change the directory up. We're going to head into library, and then we'll run tree from there to kind of just show that there is quite a bit that went into the architecture of this. Just build out this entire CD. Again, this was 3 months of like nonstop work. I mean, day in and day out, 7 days a week, putting in about 8 to 10 hours a day. This was all spending my time doing, was just building this and really just trying to get myself prepared for sort of the next era of my studio, right? And trying to lay the foundation for the kind of content that I would move forward with making, since there is a lot of different avenues that I would explore in my personal time, and also just put me in a better position to hopefully finally obtain a job in my field or somewhere adjacent to it, to where my skills can actually be properly used. But thank you so much for coming along for this journey. It was a pleasure getting to show you guys all of these new features and what Prisxane has to offer, and there's more to come in the future as the studio now is fully redone from the ground up, and live streams will hopefully be back on track. So once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.